Hi guys, today we'll start on gastrointestinal physiology, and I would like to give you an overview of the GI activities. And there are three broad concepts you should take away from um, from this overview. There's a function, structure, and um, innervation. So we'll talk about each of these, but first let's give an introduction to the GI tract. And this is a simplified version, and of course, and so we see a mouth, some salivary glands, an esophagus, a stomach, liver, and pancreas, the small intestine, which goes in the order of duodenum, and then jejunum, and then the ileum, and then we of course get into the large intestine, the colon, and then into the anus or rectum. And so the functions of each of these are listed right on the side, right here on this side. We see that the mouth, of course, food enters, and the salivary glands provide some mucus and protein secretions to digest starch and begin the digestion process. The esophagus carries the food to the stomach, and in the stomach we digest proteins and break up the food in preparation for the small intestine. And of course, we also have excretions of pancreas and liver into the small intestine, which aids and hormone signals too, which aids in coordinating in digestion. And in the large intestine, we see some absorption of salt and water. Majority of salt and water control is done by the kidneys. And we'll talk about that later. And of course, in the anus and rectum, we have waste exit. So let's talk about the function of a GI tract, and there are five uh, functions. There in general there are five broad ones. Those include motility, motility, digestion, um, secretion, absorption, and immunity. So let me just change the color. What's a nice color? I don't know. Maybe something yellow. And so motility, when we talk, well, let me first give you an introduction to this. So here's a mouth, esophagus, stomach, intestine, colon, and the rectum. And when we talk about motility, we're talking about the passage of food from one end to the other end. And this is, of course, it can be driven by maybe by gravity, um, but majority of it is driven by muscles, and particularly generation of a pressure gradient. So we have food entering the mouth, passing through the esophagus, stomach, intestine, and colon, and then exits through the anus. And there's a high pressure from one end, and throughout the movement, there's in general, uh, particularly at where the food is, of when the food is chewed, it's called the bolus. So where the bolus is, let's call this a mass of food that we just chewed. There's a there's a contraction of um, smooth muscle and on one side of the bolus and the relaxation of smooth muscle on the other side of the bolus. And this creates a localized high pressure gradient. high pressure and low pressure, and which drives the food towards the lower pressure. So that's motility. Uh, digestion. Digestion takes place in the stomach. We're digesting the food, breaking up the food, preparing it for the intestine where we will absorb nutrients and secrete mucus to help um, move the food along and expel the waste. Secretion occurs throughout um, the tract. We have secretion in the salivary glands in the mouth. We have secretion of serous and mucus secretions. Serous simply means proteins. We're secreting proteins that help digest starch and just get the digestion process going. Mucus helps move the food, giving lubrication to the food so it could pass it through your body uh, with more ease. And so this occurs in the mouth, esophagus. There's some more mucus secretion. Um, in the stomach, we're secreting enzymes that will again help in digestion. Um, and then we're also secreting in the small intestine from the pancreas and from the liver. We're secreting enzymes and hormones and signaling molecules, which all help in um, digesting the food and absorption and coordination. So we have this throughout. There, and then the colon, we're also having secreting mucus and some salts. Um, so we're preparing, and mucus, of course. So just to prepare the ease of passage of the food or bolus. Uh, and then digestion, we most digestion occurs, uh, but it occurs in a patterned manner. And let me just get a better color. Digestion, or excuse me, absorption. Absorption occurs in a patterned manner, and we see a higher amount of absorption, more dense absorption occurring in the beginning of the intestine, and then it uh, the density of absorption gets lower as we move further down. Uh, so in the duodenum and jejunum, we have a high degree of villi, and the whole absorption mechanism occurs here, where we're absorbing nutrients, and towards the end of the intestine, we're more so preparing it for exit. And so we have less absorption, and we still have secretion, and so that's how. And so we absorb nutrients, and it enters a blood vessel, or some enter, also we'll learn later. Um, some enter cholesterol, perhaps enters the lymphatics, but uh, most nutrients enter the blood system and heads towards the liver, where they're for processing, and then towards the rest of the body. So we have nutrients processing. Let's draw a little factory. There's a little chimneys. This is a factory. And then the rest of the body goes into the rest of the body after the liver. And then we have immunity. So we could think about immunity as the following. The the GI tract, although it's in your body, it's really an external environment, because you're putting external foreign objects in your mouth, you're chewing, and it enters your enters this GI tract. And really your GI tract is an interface between your body and the external environment. If you're thinking about everything you put in your food as foreign objects, and that might include bacteria and other particles, the GI tract has to be able to sense that and convey that information to the body or fight it off. So it's really an interface between um, body and in a foreign environment. So those are the five functions, general functions of the GI tract: motility, digestion, secretion, absorption, and immunity. So let's talk about the histological features of the GI tract. So we have a lumen. This is the lumen, and then we have there's we could break this down. There's a mucosa layer, submucosal layer, and muscularis externa. So let's find these right here. So the mucosal layer includes, let's do a different color. Mucosal layer is this area right here, mucosa, and it includes the mucosa and the mucosal layer is actually three things. There's the epithelium, the top layer epithelium is the skin and cells that are really the interface between the lumen and the rest of the body. And then um, there's the lamina propria, which is just loose connective tissue, lamina propria, and this darker lining, the black one that I've drove over it, that is the muscularis mucosa. It's a it's a thin layer of muscle, smooth muscle. And then the next layer is the submucosal layer. Submucosa. It's below the mucosa. And so we see that right here. It begins where the black line, right below the muscularis mucosa, and ends right around. It's pretty much the gray area. And I'm just encircling it with this green um, ink. So submucosa. Submucosa is, as the name suggests, it's right below the mucosal layer, and majority it contains like major blood and lymphatic vessels and submucosal nerve plexus, which we'll talk more about shortly. And then the muscularis externa. Muscularis externa is basically anything below, not anything, but everything below the submucosa and until the serosa or adventitia layer. With serosa or adventitia, they're basically the same, means the same thing. Basically, it means connective tissue layer, which is just do a different color, which is just at the very basement. It's holding this entire structure in place. So the muscularis externa layer is everything in between, below the submucosa and the serosa adventitia. Um, so the muscularis externa includes a circular muscular layer, which is more in the more towards the lumen. It's closer to the lumen, and this circular layer, as it suggests, is circular. It goes around now around the entire structure, and then there's a myenteric nerve plexus, and then there's a longitudinal muscle layer. Let me just clean this up. This is kind of messy. So here's the adventitia. serosa boundary, and oops, this is so between here, this yellow line and this yellow line is the muscularis externa layer, and includes a circular muscle, smooth muscle, which is circular as the name suggests, and it goes around. And there's a longitudinal muscle that's in line here. That is in line. This is circular muscle, and then there's a longitudinal muscle which is in line, perpendicular to plane of this surface. And that so it's going in and out of the paper. And then you have in between a nerve plexus layer, which is called the myenteric nerve plexus. And as you could as suggested by the name myenteric and where it's located, it's you could reason that it controls it innervates the two muscle layers. So you could say that this whole unit, this muscularis externa unit, it helps in motility. One of the main functions we've covered already. So I just want to beat this in again, talk more about. So this is more of a histological uh, diagram you might see, um, and you can see that we have the muscularis externa layer right here. This is the serosal coat. The coat goes on the outside. It's this connective tissue holding the entire structure in place in the body. And so the muscularis externa has a circular, so this is a cross section. And so we see the circular muscular layer. And it's circular because it's wraps around the entire uh, GI wall. Now we have this longitudinal muscle right here, which is basically it's longitudinal. It travels the length of the GI tract. Think of the GI tract as a tube, and it's traveling the length of the tube. And then is these there's a nerve plexus. It's called the myenteric nerve plexus. So, and it's innervating the two layers. And then we have the submucosal layer, which, by the way, this is a cross section of duodenum, and you tell one of the distinguishing features are there are glands in the submucosal layer. We'll talk more about the differences along the tract. But let's just, for the purposes of introducing you to the layers of the GI wall, I'm just using this as an example. So we had the muscularis externa layer down here, and then we have the um, submucosal layer here, and then there's all there does in general it doesn't contain glands in the submucosal layer, but in the duodenum and in the esophagus there are uh, glands, so you can see a gland. These are all glands right here. These are all glands, and this is a gland too. Um, or a crypt, and we in the submucosal layer, we also see blood vessels. I'm not sure, maybe these little right here vessels, and we also see in lymphatic vessels, and we also see submucosal nerve plexus. So it's difficult to tell where runs along here, but let's just think of it like right here. And if you think of where it's positioned, there's glands and there's nerve plexuses. So then you could reasonably assume that these nerve are controlling the gland or helping control glands and even some small smooth muscle that extends out up into the mucosal layer into the villi. We'll talk more about that later. So we have and then let's get the last layer, which is the mucosal layer. Mucosal layer is everything here. So that includes this muscularis mucosa, smooth muscle, and it gets its innervation from the submucosal nerve plexus. And these muscles help in again in contracting villi and glands and all that. And so we have so the mucosal layer includes epithelium. You can see the epithelium is just the very edge of these villi. It includes cells that are interfacing with the lumen. The lumen is the white, and uh, and then we see a lamina propria, which is in between. And these are lymphatics in here that run down and into the submucosal layer. And those are in general that is the structure of the histological features of the GI tract. And here is a really nice image of the GI. It's an overall histological organization of the digestive tube. I don't know where this image came from, but it's a really nice one, and I would certainly cite it if I had known where it is. It came from my one of my lecture notes. But this is a nice feature because you see that we see that there's the esophagus, the stomach, duodenum, jejunum, ileum. This is all the small intestine, and then colon, which is the large intestine. And so we can see that these all differ. We see a pattern. We see that there's a difference. And we see the major features here, which I've already discussed, is the mucosal layer, the submucosa, and the muscularis uh, externa, as well as the adventitia or the serosa. And that's just the connective tissue that holds this together. This is basically the foundation holding this together. Um, So this is kind of like a matrix. We see that in the esophagus, we see, the cell structures they're less, they're not villous like here. These are villi. They're flat, they're stratified squamous epithelium, and and the reason is that they're not meant for absorption. So there's no need to have uh, columnar epithelium for absorption. So we see that it's just meant for moving food down the esophagus into the stomach.